just to pick up very briefly, last time Jude was talking about this diagram on the left, which is the Cynefin framework. And if you see there in the lighter writing that it's got clear in the bottom right, complicated in the top right, complex in the top left, and chaotic. It's a way of thinking about different types of systems. We talked a lot about complicated. They're like big complicated systems with lots of parts, but the thing about them is they're very predictable. So I just flew down from Wellington this morning. I just jumped on a plane, assumed it was going to work, and it did. That's a complicated system, right? It took off, it flew along, it landed, right? Someone knows how to do that. I don't, but it just worked for me. So it's a complicated system. Complex system is different. It's big, kind of complex or complicated as well, but the difference is it's not predictable. So an easy example is the picture on the right, which we are familiar with, and we looked at a video last time of a murmuration. So this is birds swarming, and we've all seen these in the natural world. That is a complex system, so it's not predictable like a plane in terms of cause and effect, but it is patterned, so it's not chaotic, right? And the lovely thing about that is not only do natural species do it, like birds, bees, fish, dolphins, but human beings love to do that as well. Not fly, but we love to self-organize. It's actually kind of meets a whole lot of our needs. And so where we ended last time was thinking about, well, what did the scientists learn about murmurations? And that's, in short, these 4 conditions are what happen in the natural world to allow birds to do that. They can swarm with 100,000 birds, and as long as there's an attractor, as long as they're independent agents, which means they can do whatever they want, as long as there's interactions between them, and as long as there's no outside of control, they can actually do that. Now making the jump to leadership, and I've studied this a lot because I'm really passionate about it. There's a bit of a contradiction here, and that is, how can you lead self-organization? I mean, self-organization is you do it yourself, right? So people are not going to be being told what to do. They're going to be intrinsically motivated in doing what they want to do. How can you lead that? Is that kind of a contradiction? And I guess where we've landed with this is, yes, you cannot, if you're interested in complex emergent behavior in humans, you cannot direct that. You can't dictate that. You can't stand up in front of them and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a reset. You can't project manage it. But what you can do is you can think about these 4 conditions. So this is the first little chunk today. Just going to have a look at how might you lead to create those conditions. So have a look on the right. You'll recognize 4 very familiar leadership actions. So they're not new actions, but the point here is that we're doing simple things repetitively to create conditions. And if we can do that, we effectively hold space and make it very likely that self-organization or humans will respond in emergent ways, right? Now, if you take away the language of emergent and self-organization, we're really talking about creating spaces for people to come together with like-minded people and make impact, which is what we all want to do, right? So that's what we're talking about. So just going through these, each condition. So the conditions kind of come from the natural world, but we are natural as humans. So let's think about it. You need an attractor. An attractor is like the spark. It's like the energy source of self-organization. If you don't have an attractor, it doesn't happen. So those birds don't fly like that all day. They only do it at certain times because of an attractor. Humans also can do that if there's a threat or an opportunity. Now, if you think about earthquake, mosque shooting, COVID, any number of big, nasty things, threats, we saw emergent human behavior in the positive side. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get emergent yucky behavior, all right? But generally you get a threat can motivate and can kind of trigger this. Opportunity also does it, all right? It's either way, it's like a candle and a moth. It's something's going to attract it. Now, in the leadership side of it, you can't use threat, can you? It's not ethical to threaten your team. But what you could do is you could raise the awareness of a threat. All right. So there's kind of like a risk here that our students are going to really struggle if we don't get this sorted. All right. There's going to be a risk to our community. All right. So that's one way, but probably a more positive way is to think about how might we create the opportunity attractor, which is collective vision and values. And so it looks like things like this. You can read them there. Conversations about shared values, getting clear on the focus, why we're here, and let's have a collective vision. So what this is not is a leader saying, here's my vision. All right, here's our vision. I've decided what it is. Follow me. That's old school. All right, this is about being very clear that we need a vision, but it has to be co-constructed. Yep. And that becomes like the energy source. It's kind of like the heartbeat of your group or your school or your company. All right, it's like this is our reason for getting out of bed in the morning. All right, post-earthquake, all the engineers self-organized around this huge big alliance, which is another story, but it's amazing. Why did they do that? Because they wanted to get their city back on their feet, back on its feet. So that was the reason they thought we can get through all the competition and all the financial challenge and all the other things because together we want to get our city going again. You know, that was a very energetic ignition piece. Second one, independent agents. So this in the human world, this means that like in the bird world, it means birds need to be able to fly without their wings being clipped. In the human world, that means humans have to be whole. They have to experience whole order. So if you've got humans in your group or your school or company who are really struggling with their whole order, then they're not going to be able to fly. You know, they're not going to be able to merge. So a huge priority is what we see on the right. And you could use different words for this. We've said proactively mentor, all right, but it could be show manaakitanga and care for people, or aroha for people. It's actually just caring for the humans. I loved how Razor Robertson said it in his interview last week that he used the word love so many times about his rugby players, and it was kind of countercultural, but that's what we're talking about here, is like actually caring for them as humans. Yeah. So we've done a lot of research on this, and there's lots of different ways this can be expressed, but you know, you look at this list in white and they're all free, right? They're free ways of showing care for people, right? Creating space for them, noticing things, listening, appreciating, being committed to that they leave in a better shape than when they arrived, not just professionally, but personally as humans, relationally, all those kind of things. Note achievements, celebrate. So we know these things. Number 3, interactions with neighbors. So the birds, the reason why the birds can do this is because they like a certain spacing. Now, we as humans do have space bubbles, but it's not quite the same. What we're talking about here is that the interactions are dialogue or kōrero or talanoa. And that's a hardwired human need to be able to be in conversation with other people. And so what we're doing here is the action is fostering interaction and shared learning. So it's basically facilitating conversations. And it's almost as simple as the more the better. All right, the more conversation, the better. So if you've got 10 minutes with your team, or if I've got 10 minutes with my team, I'm not going to spend 9 minutes of those speaking at them and doing a wee speech, you know, and sharing stuff and updating them on things. I'm going to be using it to facilitate conversation, ask a question, get people talking to each other. All right. Open up communication, role model of learning focus. How might we do this? Think about the culture and build mechanisms. That's really important. That's like meeting structures. That's like communication patterns. It's like the things that are the way we work need to be proactively growing dialogue and allowing people to speak and share freely. And the more the merrier, pretty much. And the fourth one, decentralized control. So the birds would never do that if they were controlled by some remote system. Same with this, humans need to have agency. So you need to distribute power and decentralized control. Talking to some principals this morning about this up in Wellington, the thing that I've learned though, is to don't throw all power away and distribute everything straight away, because it's a hospital pass. People will probably fail if you drop it on them. So it's better to kind of have a scaffold that allows you to be sharing power, and you know, because as leaders we do have responsibility, but it's actually building collaborative relationships and share the leadership. And I probably would write there bit by bit, you know, just one click at a time, and just grow, foster interaction, independence, and trust. Now, two practical ways of thinking about this before we go into a breakout. Again, 5 principles I was in a PGC with this morning, or PRG actually. They always have, or we always have the same questions. The first one is, what am I going to do? What is the solution to this? Whatever the scenario is, it's like they're gnarly. You know, what am I going to do with this thing? Haven't come across this before. And the second question is, I'm very aware that I need to take people with me. and I don't want to just take off by myself. So I don't know what to do, but I've got to take people with me. And that's kind of a yucky combo because it makes you feel reasonably inadequate, you know, because it's how do you stand up and say, okay, team, let's do this, but I don't know what it is, right? So coming back to that, I think it was the third leadership action, fostering interaction, shared learning, collective intelligence means, like if you've got 10 in your team or 100 in your team, that's 10 or 100 brains. So let's use all the brains rather than me use just mine and tell the people what to do. So let's create a space where people can bring their brains to the party. All right. And if you can do that and we can stick with that and we can corridor, we can co-design, we can brainstorm, all these kind of things, we're going to end up with A, better solutions, right? Which is great because I'm not intelligent enough to figure out the answer to this. And B, we're going to get better ownership because humans want to be involved, right? People talk about authorship. You know, we want to know that we had a say in this. It doesn't have to be exactly what we thought, but we want to be included. Yeah. So that's one way. If you prefer, another way is thinking about it in picture form. So if you're dealing with like a complicated system, like that airplane I was talking about, there's no real ambiguity in that. You basically figure out what you're going to do, need and vision, then you search it up and get best practice, which is your proven ideas, step 2. You read those and then you train people in them and then you build capacity, roll out, scale out, and then embed it. All right. And that's probably what you do when you're designing and flying a plane and complicated sort of predictable systems. But most human systems are not that. So that works for things, but not humans. So have a look at this picture, slightly different color, but look how it's similar to the previous one. So this is now a complex system. All right. Go back to the previous one, need and vision, adopt proven ideas. This one, need and vision. Oh, no proven ideas. We haven't done this before. We're in new ground now. All right. Never actually had this experience at this school in this community and don't quite know what the precedent is. So what do? Get all the brains around the table. Collective intelligence, brainstorm, and you can see all the little yellow arrows. That's kind of like, let's come up with 6 different ways we might do this. All right. Okay, let's try them. Let's try all of them. That's a pilot. Little yellow feedback loop. Oh, the number 1 and 6 didn't work. Let's get rid of them and we'll just stick with the next 4. Right. And you can see how it kind of iterates into a solution. And what we still end up with solutions in this way of working, which is more the adaptive leadership way of working, but we don't know the solution in the advance. We figure out the solution as we go. And we actually, in my experience, end up with way better solutions because they're unique. You know, they're often exponential. They don't only solve that problem, but they solve other ones as well. Okay, so Stephen's going to pop you into breakout groups of 3, I think, and it's going to be about 7 minutes. And there's a question, there it is. Share a time when you've experienced the adaptive leadership approach. So the adaptive leadership approach we're talking about is this one, the idea of using those 4 leadership actions to create self-organization so that it's self-organizing solution. Okay, reflect on your experience of how this impacted you. What was it like? It might have been when you did it, or it might have just been in a team when your leader was obviously using an adaptive leadership approach. Okay. So the interesting thing is, and I wasn't in your breakout, so I don't know what you talked about, but there is some great things about adaptive leadership and when humans really come together and self-organize in that way, but actually there's also sometimes some downsides to it. And this next piece, you want to talk about creating balance and adaptive leadership. And this actually is probably my favorite topic on earth, this thing we're going to talk about next. And those of you that know me will see why. So let's just pull back a wee bit and have we think about this, the self-organization thing, this idea that humans can come together and do cool things in emergent ways, like the birds, is like a network way of working. If you look at that picture on the right, you'll see that that way of working is a way of humans interacting. So it's organizing ourselves as a network, and it's based on connections, common interests, multiple links, it's mutual, akal relationships, it's flexible, viral, all that kind of thing. And that's a pretty energetic way of humans interacting. And we experience that in our lives, like say in our friendship groups, in our social media platforms, sometimes in our professional settings where we're collaborating with others across a project, maybe in our kahui ako when we're collaborating with others from other organizations. So it's more the network, you know, and associations, where we're networked, or we go to conferences, or we're part of communities of practice. It's a network way of working. I would describe it as a circular way of working. It's kind of like a sharing around the circle, within the circle. The other way that we're more familiar with is the one on the left, which I would call the triangular way of working. And it's the org chart there. So you can see a small part of an org chart. It's a triangle. It has a top and a bottom. It's got blue boxes. They are the job descriptions. It's got lines of communication. It's got top. It's got a bottom. It's got sort of segments or departments or specialties. It's got layers. And that is probably the most common way of organizing humans that we know of in work, right? But we also use the network way, the more adaptive emergent way. And they're kind of two ends of a spectrum, if you like. Now, I kind of implied this before, but there's pros and cons of each of these. And if we have a wee look for a moment, this picture here is going to help us here, because there's pros and cons of the more adaptive, complex network way of working, and pros and cons of the hierarchical way of working. Like, both of them are good and bad. All right. So if you want to try it, just with your finger, trace around that picture. And what is that shape? It's a what? A infinity sign. What else is it? It's a Mobius strip, I think they call it. It's a lazy 8, right? But we call it the butterfly. Okay, see, it kind of looks like a butterfly. So what is the relevance of that? Now, if we were together in a room today and we'd had a big bit of flip chart, we could build this together. But since we're not, I'll kind of build it for you. Now, if I asked you what's great about the network kind of adaptive way of working, like the breakout you just had, you'd probably say things like this. All right. And I love it for that reason. If I could do that all day, I would. All right. Empowering, inclusive, valuing, self-organizing. Yeah. Unfortunately, though, I have seen that go bad. Okay. And it can go really, really bad. So it can be just fluffy and ambiguous and kind of confusing and time wasting, but then it can be infighting and exhausting. And if you think about Lord of the Flies as a story, you know, it started off flexible and empowering, the kids on the island, beautiful. Then they got into two kind of teams, and then they ended up warring, and Piggy got thrown off a cliff. All right, it was pretty bad. The modern day version of that is Survivor. You know, put some random humans on an island, appoint no leader, and expect that they're going to have a good time. And of course, they all end up hating on each other, and it makes good TV, but it's not fun for them. So that's the network side. Okay, it's a bit sobering. On the hierarchy side, this is a different way of organizing people, more triangular, and it has some great things about it. I like those things. I probably prefer the network positives, but I like those as well. Predictable, efficient, logical, good system, clarity, feel safe. And as you can see, there's going to be a negative. Okay, sometimes hierarchies get too tight, inflexible, creativity is lacking, squash, and then it gets real nasty, where it gets risk averse, gets dehumanizing, and dependent on a few. So like one good person at the top of a hierarchy can make it fantastic, and one stink person at the top of a hierarchy kill it within days, which is quite scary, right? Whereas a network is not dependent on a few. It's kind of very much, it has redundancies built into it. Now, where does the butterfly come into this? If I think about it, let's imagine you've got a new role at a new place and you've got a team of 10. Which approach would you use? Would you use the network way or the hierarchy way? All right. And I'm thinking you probably want the positives in the top of the picture, and they've put the word thriving up there, and you wouldn't want the negatives, and I've put dying down there. So how can you get both positives and none of the negatives? All right. Everyone wants that. Okay. The problem is these are ways of organizing humans that are not actually, it's not possible to be doing both at the same time, because one's a triangle, one's a circle. One's a boss and one's not. Right, one's leader as a leader, like a positional leader, and one doesn't. It's leaderless. So that's where the butterfly comes in. So let's just talk this through, and you're going to get a copy of this picture in your breakout this time to have a think about where have you seen this happen in your own professional experience. But let's say if you're like me and you think, you know, if I had to go one way or the other, I'd probably go network. So let's okay, I'm welcome to my this new team, and it's great to see you, and let's be real empowering and flexible and being inclusive, and that goes really well for a while, and you can see the wing grows to the right, but then it gets to a certain high point and then it starts dropping down and warning signs start happening. Okay, and you can see those there. And it's pretty much inevitable that at some point that network that was going so well is suddenly going to get a bit of confusion, just in time planning, things falling through the gaps, people starting going, hold on, I'm confused now. And a little bit of like, oh, this is not what I signed up for. You know, now that wing, that right-hand wing of the butterfly goes right down to the bottom. So I've been down there many times where I've gone from a group really thriving to a completely self-imploding, going down to the bottom there. And if I could draw an explosion, it would be at the bottom of the right wing, right? And it can be end in tears. Now, thankfully, there is a way out of there, and you can see that inside part of the right wing. If you can notice it early enough, if you can pause and reflect quick enough, and then do something, as in add more structure and shape, you can save it, right? And I've often had to kind of do a reset like that and go, actually, we do need to write things down. We do need to have some policies, and we probably do need to have some role clarity and an agenda with actions on it, you know, and we need to actually do that. Now, that's all hierarchical type things. So you can see how the butterfly wing goes up to the left now. Now, let's say you were not like that and you started more like, hey, I've got a new team and let's make this real slick. It's efficient, predictable, and let's do that. And that's cool. And everyone's going to love that for a while, because finally we know what we're doing around here and it's clear and it feels safe. Unfortunately, there's some warning signs as well. And you can actually strangle the life out of a group if you go too far with that. You can see those things there. And probably the biggest thing for me is that you get conflict, but you either get it in two different ways. You get it noisy conflict, so people hating on each other and getting loud and critical, or you get silence. And that's way worse, but that's still the same kind of thing going on. People just stonewall you, and you're thinking, crikey, someone pulled the plug out, right? There's still humans sitting there, but there's nothing coming back. Now, is there a way out of that one? Yep. Funnily enough, you got to notice and pause and reflect, but this time you don't add more structure and shape. Of course, you add more dialogue and opportunities, the stuff we were talking about in the previous session. Now, both the bottom wings of the butterfly are painful corners to go around, and I wouldn't recommend it very often. So the other option is the little butterfly at the top. See the light blue one? That is a far better alternative, which is, okay, let's say I'm going to be network style for a while. Do that, but watch the warning signs. And as soon as they start flickering, start adjusting and adding more structure and shape, right? So you can turn and move quicker and be more responsive, add a bit of efficiency and predictability, watch out for the warning signs. It's getting a bit starting to choke it, respond and open it up again, right? So that there, you can see my finger going around it, is pretty much describes my style of leading. And this is with every team that I work with. I'm trying to decide, what does the team need this week and this day and this month? Is it more openness, more conversation, more dialogue, facilitation, or is it more kind of like definition? Is it more kind of boundaries, right? And those things are quite different leadership styles. And you can see how my hands are going. There's kind of like an in and out kind of thing going on, like a piano accordion or a butterfly. So I'm going to leave that with you and pop you into the same breakout groups. And we're just thinking about, as you look at this picture here and you think about your own professional experience, what insights are you getting? Where have you been on this butterfly? Right, I've shared quite a few examples. All right. Oh, there's a couple of final words there. My MBA students at university said that picture was too complicated. They just want simple words. So they said funky, wild, slick, or stale. And I guess the punchline is a bit of funky and a bit of slick. All right. And I'm not sure about those words. They're a bit too twee. But anyway, that's what they said. So share one insight from the butterfly. When you look at that picture, is there anything there that's speaking to your experience? Okay.
But where you've positioned yourself within a system, when a system is in a state of flux and change. And so we'll use the Bacana two loops model, which I think, some of you will be familiar with, to explain the model first, and then invite you to think about where you do position yourself, and where you would like to position yourself in the future. So there's sort of 3 parts to this model. It looks a bit confusing if you haven't seen it before, so I'll just slowly walk us through it first. So the first part is the top arrow, which talks about the dominant system. So it could be anything. It could be institutional, economic, political, ideological. For example, you might think of systems, especially in the 20th century, where there's been dominance and then they've gone into decay or decline. We're seeing that slowly with oil-based economies. We did see a big decline in the 20th century around religious institutions like the church in Western society, gender binary, normal ideologies, industrial economies. You might remember the suffragette movement, civil rights movements, the early rise of feminism. So these are both like institutional, economic, political, and or they could also be ideological. And so they're dominant systems that gradually kind of enter into a shift or a change, a significant shift or change, or some people would go as far as to say total decay, death, or composting of that system or that ideology. And so it slowly happens over decades. So many of the examples I've given are met with resistance. So people try to push back against that change. And you see it in education at the moment with the current political government pushing back to a neoconservative swing, actually also around Te Tiriti or Waitangi as well. So that push back against change, that wave of change that's coming. And so what happens with how change happens, that Buchanan argues that how this change happens is that first you have pioneers who start showing up and providing views or taking actions that are different to the mainstream. And those pioneers are met with resistance from those not wanting, for those who want to maintain that dominant system and hold it in place. But gradually, the second point is that the emergent system. So you see the pioneers working in the dominant system as sort of almost like outliers, that then their emergence happens as pioneers come together and network together. They form networks. And then you see down the bottom that those networks become more organized. So in communities of practice where they're supporting each other, sharing ideas, and then ultimately up to the part of that bottom arrow where there's illumination. So illumination is the sharing of stories of change. And I've seen actually with social justice movement in New Zealand, like there might be really great pioneers and networks and even communities of practice, but illumination isn't always there. Like stories of change aren't highlighted. So you get stories of the dominant system. I mean, boot camps is a classic one at the moment, which that's the dominant story that we hear, but there are voices trying to bring out about illumination of other ways of thinking that are needed, and it plays a really important role in systems change. So this is the work of creating an emergent system, is what the two loops argues. And then the third part is that also, if you go back to the dominant system, while change is happening, people might be acting outside of the dominant system, like kohanga reo, kura kaupapa movements are an example of that in New Zealand, which happened outside of the dominant system. But you might also have allies that are working within the dominant system, and they really play a really important role because they believe in the emergence, they believe in the change and what needs to happen, and they provide support of hospicing the old system, or it's what's known as hospicing the old system. And they're also allies who work from within the dominant system to champion change. For example, they might be policymakers, or they have power to create resource flow towards change. So they're also seeking to activate change and support the emergence of something new. So we share this as we're looking at leading in complex systems, because complexity is about the emergent system and it's not scripted and unknown. And so you might have found yourself as a pioneer, you might have found yourself networked, you might have found yourself supporting and nourishing communities of practice, or you might be a storyteller. So we invite you to think about where in the system have you found yourself. You could be within the dominant system. which is for myself as a education professional. I've worked within the dominant institution to activate change, and also existed in alternative forms of education outside of the dominant system. And so I've moved across both, and you might be someone that does that too. I just think it's quite helpful to think about where you are, where your teams are, and also where you'd like to be. So that takes us to the next slide, Chris, if you can flick over to slide and next one. Yeah. So just invite you to take a minute just to silently reflect. I'll stop talking and consider where you have been within that system and why, and where you would like to be in the future and why.